Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 17th meeting of this committee in 2020. Our public business is an evidence session on the division between Scottish Government and party political matters. Can I remind all those present and watching that we are bound by the terms of our remit and the relevant court orders, including the need to avoid contempt of court by identifying certain individuals through jigsaw identification. The committee as a whole has agreed that it is not our role to revisit events that were a focus of the trial that could be seen to constitute a rerun of the criminal trial. Our remit is to consider and report on the actions of the First Minister, Scottish Government officials and special advisers in dealing with complaints about Alex Salmond, former First Minister, considered under the Scottish Government's handling of harassment complaints involving current or former ministers and procedure and actions in relation to the Scottish Ministerial Code. The more we get into specifics of evidence, that is time, people, cases, the more we run the risk of identifying those who made complaints. The more we ask about specific matters covered in the trial, including events explored in the trial, the more we run the risk of rerunning the trial. In questions, reference to specific dates and individuals should be avoided, and questions should be phrased in general terms where possible to avoid the risk of jigsaw identification of complainants. I would also emphasise that the committee would be content to receive written supplementary points should any witness to this inquiry have concerns that their response may stray into this territory. With that, can I welcome Peter Murrell, Chief Executive, Scottish National Party? And I would begin by inviting Mr Murrell to take the oath. Mr Murrell, would you please raise your right hand and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That I will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
That I will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And we'll move...
Convener, Mr Murrell's microphone is out of position there. It might not be picked
up.
Yes.
I thought you were just being very softly spoken.
As ever.
Thank you, Mr Cole-Hamilton. I think we'll move straight to questions, please, from members of the committee. And first to Margaret Mitchell, our Deputy Convener.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Mr Murrell. You've been Chief Executive of the SNP since 1999, and under the party's Code of Conduct, it states every member owes a duty to refrain from conduct likely to cause or hinder the party's proper pursuit of its aims. Would that conduct include bullying and harassment, including sexual harassment?
It was the year 2000 I started as Chief Exec, and yes, it would.
Yes, okay. Well, during these 20 years, Nicola Sturgeon was Deputy First Minister from 2007 to 2014, Minister under the Fairness of Work process that the Permanent Secretary would report to regarding misconduct complaints and concerns about, for example, bullying and sexual harassment, and then First Minister from 2014 till the present. Were you aware of any complaints or concerns during this time about SNP members who were ministers, or by SNP members who were civil servants, government officials, special advisor, or employed in some capacity by the Parliament?
I was not.
You were not. So no concerns were raised for you by Nicola Sturgeon about any of that?
That's correct.
Right. Well, the committee has heard from the FDA in its submission that in reflecting back on the last 10 years, we are aware of approaches on behalf of about 30 members in relation to at least 5 ministerial offices. A number of these approaches were resolved through mediation and formal resolution. And we know from Leslie Evans, the Permanent Secretary's evidence, that a number of these concerns were about bullying and harassment. Now, these were obviously SNP offices with SNP ministers. Do you consider it was a failing in the party that you were apparently unaware of any of this going on?
These would be Scottish Government complaints that were being processed. They wouldn't be SNP complaints. The SNP wasn't aware of any complaints at that time.
Isn't it strange that we're looking at SNP government ministers? All right, yes, they have a government role, but they're first and foremost members of the SNP. But you as Chief Executive and apparently the First Minister absolutely oblivious to this?
I can only speak for myself. I wasn't aware of any complaints.
Okay, let's move on then. An email from Nicola Sturgeon as party leader was sent to all the SNP elected representatives and staff members on the 31st of October 2017. It stated, "Today I have instructed that we put in place an additional confidential independent route to raise concerns, ensuring women in particular have the confidence to raise any concerns." Was this issue discussed with you before the email was sent, and were you involved in the drafting?
Yes, it was, and yes, I was involved in the drafting. The timeline at that point was that the previous week at Westminster, there were allegations made against some MPs about sexual misconduct, and there was quite an atmosphere at that point for all political parties to look at their processes. I think some parties, UK parties, changed their processes the week before. And the Sunday Herald on the Sunday, so the Sunday the 29th of October 2017, ran a story about allegations of sexual misconduct at Holyrood. So that following day, Nicola wrote, I think as she says in that email, she had written to the presiding officer asking for a meeting of all party leaders here at Holyrood. And that morning I contacted one of the firms of solicitors that we used to ask if they would have a solicitor who could act as an independent mechanism for reporting, so that the historic situation that there was one member of staff at headquarters that would gather complaints and would liaise with the National Secretary who deals with SNP complaints, that could be supplemented by someone else who could be seen as more independent. So there would be an internal process, and the usual person would do the single point of contact headquarters for that job, would take on that if somebody chose to go the internal route. But if they would prefer to take an independent external route to report their concerns, that then would come back to the National Secretary, that option should be made available. So over the course of the Monday, we put that arrangement in place, and I think on the Tuesday we issued that email on behalf of Nicola Sturgeon to elected members here at Holyrood, Westminster and all staff.
I suppose my only comment would be that, it's 2017 before this even appears on the SNP radar, let alone it appears to the First Minister's radar.
Well, I think there's the Me Too movement of that autumn that was circling the world effectively, and so in the Western world, lots of organisations, political parties amongst them, were putting in new arrangements for reporting concerns. As I say, the previous week at Westminster, Theresa May was having to deal with allegations involving Conservative members, and there were some suggestions of Labour members as well. And on Sunday, there was some suggestion here at Holyrood that there was some inappropriate behaviour happening in this Parliament. So there was lots of activity at that time around the world and in the UK politics about allegations of historic sexual misconduct by people.
But during your 20 years as Chief Executive, you've never had any occasion to speak to the police informally, have any discussions with the police, or take any action or aware of any action being taken during that 20 years, and more specifically to the period that our committee is looking at from the 2007-8 up to the present day, for any party members?
None whatsoever.
Okay. And were you aware that on the same day, 31st of October 2017, this email, that the Cabinet had issued instruction to the Scottish Government's Permanent Secretary to review policies and procedures to deal with harassment at the same time as this was happening within your party?
No awareness of that at all.
You weren't. Finally, you state in your evidence that a media inquiry was made to the SNP in November 2017 regarding an incident at Edinburgh Airport. So you were aware of that at the time. What action did you take as a result of receiving this media inquiry in 2017?
The inquiry came in early evening of that day. I think Nicola and I were going to an event shortly thereafter. I think in her evidence she sets out what action she took, so that's the action that the SNP took at that time to inquire about that matter.
Inquire with, could you elaborate?
Mr. Salmond. I mean, it's in, I think, you know, I've read Nicola's evidence and it's there.
Right. Was this the first time you were made aware of this incident?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And again, just were the police involved at that point? Did you have any occasion or anyone else in the Parliament to discuss or talk to the police? Okay, no further questions. Thank you.
Okay, Angela Constance.
Thanks very much, Convener. Good morning, Mr Murrell. At the end of this process, committee will write a report. And in that report, I hope we can make some recommendations about how the Scottish Government in future can handle complaints better, much better. So, as Chief Executive of Scotland's largest party, where we lead administrations in a range of local authorities, we have members in both the UK Parliament and the Scottish Parliament. I want to ask you a few questions about how we can make sure that complaints are handled in the right place, in the right way, at the right time. So can I start by asking you to explain, in your view, what situations do you think complaints about elected politicians should be taken forward, either with their political party or their respective organisation, whether that's government, local government or a parliament?
I mean, the Parliament here has looked at has had two reports, in fact, which have looked at this matter. And I mean, I think the main thing is the complexity of the employment legislation that's in place. So a Parliament like this has, you know, many employers and many different people working here, same at Westminster. And, you know, there's been some discussion about there being an independent investigatory body. And it's just difficult to see how that would work. I think each institution has to have its own processes and procedures in place to deal with allegations of misconduct. So, you know, another way of doing it, you know, would have to be that. It would have to be independent of those other processes. They would still have to exist because people have employment rights and the ability to raise their concerns within that framework.
Okay. In your view, do you see the complaints processes of political parties, governments, parliaments as entirely separate, or are there situations where, you know, there needs to be referrals? You know, for example, maybe you could talk us through, you know, in theory, what happens if you as Chief Executive get a complaint either about a councillor or a parliamentarian, where that's potentially an issue for the party, but also the organisation in which someone serves in?
Well, within the SNP's rule book, and I copied this to members as part of my first submission, there's different standing orders for the different parts of, so the standing orders for SNP councillors, SPs, MPs. And within that, there's a disciplinary process. So the group could take action against a member of Parliament or a councillor, or they could refer matters to the National Secretary for investigation. So those options exist within the current rule book of the SNP. But on top of that, obviously, someone could, within a council or within a parliament, go through the processes that are in place in those institutions. So the options are there for people, you know, and depending on what it is, obviously, everybody has a right to go to the police if they think there's any matter that needs to go to them. So there's different options for people across the different institutions. But
So-
no one size fits all. I mean,
Yeah.
it's,
So bear in mind, at a time when, theoretically, if anyone makes a complaint, is quite likely to be a time of distress. People are likely to be upset if you're in a position where you're making a complaint about harassment or other types of inappropriate behaviour. And there are different procedures for, independent organisations, parliaments, political parties, governments, all the rest of it. How, therefore, in your capacity as SNP Chief Executive, would you make sure that a complainant was signposted to the right places to make a complaint as well as within the party?
I mean, the rule book is there. It's on the party's website. The processes and procedures and reporting mechanisms are there for members of the party. From an SNP perspective, then it's very clear that the National Secretary has the sole ability to send a complaint to member conduct committee. So if it's that route, then we would ask someone either to use the internal or external route for putting their experience or complaint into a summary report that the National Secretary could then look at. So, it's about making sure, similarly with Parliament here, of making sure that you're signposting people wherever, even physical signs in the building, as to what the options are for people. And, there are a multitude of different options, including the email that was sent, physical signs and other means on the party website to refer complaints.
I'm understanding perfectly what you're saying about the National Secretary, and obviously I have some knowledge of SNP procedures. I suppose all that I'm trying to clarify is who, what and when would someone within the party signpost a complainant, not make a decision for them, but signpost a complainant that they may wish to make a complaint to a other organisation as well?
I just can't think of a circumstance that we would, do that, unless, a very clear act of criminality was on display, where we would, clearly the option to go to the police is available to everyone, but I don't think we've ever been in that situation. So,
okay. But if a parliamentarian steps out of line in some way and breaches SNP code of conduct, and it is alleged that they're also breaching a parliamentary code of conduct, is there any communication, therefore, between the party and other institutions? Or is it just left to people to take their complaint to where they wish to take it to?
I'm trying to think of scenarios where that would apply. I mean, we are obviously in charge of policing SNP complaints. If someone was alleging, misuse of public funds by a parliamentarian, then there are ways to report that are more appropriate. So, if it's something that another body has competence to investigate, then we would signpost. That's it could be investigated by the SNP, but what you're alleging is, a misuse of public funds, say, and that would be something that really should be done this way.
Okay, and is the signposting done by who?
Well,
I know we're talking theoretically here, but who would do that signposting in terms of a duty of care to a complainant?
Well, there's two different. We have two different. I mean, we're a very small team, so I'm not directly involved in either component of that. But we have one person that, helps take complaints forward, and another person who does duty of care responsibility. So, you know, if it was a complaint, then it's a single point of contact that's detailed in the email.
Okay, and your role as Chief Executive to ensure that people are, providing appropriate duty of care and investigating complaints appropriately is what, therefore?
To be consulted if... I'll just carry on. I'll not join in. It's the time of year. Yeah, I mean, I'm there if the National Secretary wants to ask for advice about anything, but very much the very strict lines of responsibility in these areas, so we don't discuss either side of complaints nor any matters to do with duty of care that staff undertake. It's just not. If someone comes to us on a confidential basis, then that's how it remains. It's not information that's shared more widely within the office, even to me.
Okay,
unless I'm consulted at a later stage by, say, the National Secretary, once it's in that post holder's.
I understand the point about confidentiality, but in terms of processes and procedures, that you have accountability for, and you have to ensure that your team are operating to the correct processes and procedures.
Well, the post holder is the National Secretary. That person has the ability to take a member complaint to the Member Conduct Committee. That's our job as staff is to support office bearers in their functions, whether that's the National Secretary or the National Treasurer or the leader of the party. Our job is to support the national office bearers in their job. So if we're asked to do something, that's what we will try and do, give the best advice we can.
Okay, and a very final question, Convener. Any reflections, therefore, about how complainants about someone in the SNP, whether it's a councillor, parliamentarian or a member of government, could be better supported, including signposted to other forms of support or other avenues to make complaints?
We strive very hard to get the balance right. Obviously we won't get it right all the time, but I think from a duty of care perspective, to make sure there's ongoing support for both complainants and responders, then we try very hard to make sure that is in place and is there for people. It's something that we take very seriously and make sure that we offer every support that we can.
Okay, thanks, Convener.
On the same theme, Alistair Allen.
Thank you, Convener. I suppose I won't be alone in wondering what some of this will have to do with a remit. I'm sure the Convener will keep us right. We have been provided, however, as you've mentioned, Mr Murrell, with some of the internal rules of the SNP around issues of discipline. Can I ask, does the system within the party, can you set out for us, automatically result in a complaint about a politician per se, a complaint about them in their role as a politician, result in an investigation within the SNP rules in any different way from an investigation that would take place for one of the SNP's 100,000 other members? Does that come down to standing orders, or are there any other differences?
That comes down to standing orders. That would be the appropriate place to pursue a complaint against a member. But if the member had breached one of the standards of the Code of Conduct for Members, then the National Secretary could refer a complaint under the standard that had been breached.
Also, one of the themes that's come up in our examination of the Scottish Government's own procedures was the distinction between what the Scottish Government talk of in terms of concerns versus complaints. I don't know how analogous that is to the system of formal versus informal complaints that the system within the SNP talks about, but can you say something about how that works? What formal or informal approaches to this look like within your system in terms of how concerns are handled?
I think we would take the view that once the National Secretary decides to refer a complaint to or a concern to the Member Conduct Committee, at that point it becomes a formal complaint. And I think I've watched other evidence sessions where, you know, this thing between what is a complaint and not a complaint, it's, you know, I think the people who are raising concerns would think that they were raising a complaint. And, you know, that's just the reality of it, that they would think that. But in terms of a process, we internally would view the decision of the National Secretary to refer it to member conduct as the point at which it becomes a formal complaint.
But the party does set out two routes, and you've mentioned them or you've alluded to them, where there is an independent route and there is an existing internal procedure. So there are two options, am I right in saying, for people who wish to raise a complaint with the party, and if they are raised through the external route, does that relate in some way to the disciplinary procedure?
I mean, the external route is really just to provide a summary of the concern being raised to the National Secretary, and then the National Secretary considers that and can make a number of different decisions about whether an investigation is required or any action is required at that time. So, you know, it's, you know, either route of, you know, bringing a concern to the attention of the National Secretary, they do the same thing, which is, you know, basically produce a summary report, which is then given to the National Secretary to make a decision.
Does one of those routes, in your view, provide a more effective means of providing that information than the other, or are they both equally useful in your view?
I think they're both equally useful. It depends, you know, because some members would like to keep matters internal, and at that time, where Me Too movement was in the news, there was certainly a thought that an independent route might also be useful for people, especially when the staff member concerned had been in post for some years and you know, may be seen to not be as independent as someone who's external to the party and reporting directly to the National Secretary. So, you know, it's just something that was seen to be offering another option for people that wanted to raise complaints.
Thank you, Convener.
And Maureen Watt.
Thank you, Convener. Morning, Mr Murrell. You've already said that procedures were looked at in relation to the Me Too movement and things that were going on among political parties throughout the UK. Could you be a bit more specific about how the procedure or new procedure in light of the Me Too movement was drawn up and who drew it up and, you know, how it was progressed?
I mean, the procedure hadn't changed. It was only that there was a new way to report concerns. The procedure, we don't have the ability to change. We have to go to conference to change the party's rule book. So you can't simply just change the disciplinary process of the SNP by executive order. It has to be done through party conference. All that was done at that stage was to look at how concerns, if there were any, could be reported, and was there any way to improve that, and, you know, offering an independent route to summarise concerns that people might have had for passing to the National Secretary seemed to add an extra option for people, which we thought was important at that time. In terms of, you know, I reached out to the solicitor myself on the Monday, the 30th of October, and by the end of that day we'd identified an individual who would take on that role, and we drafted an email, had it signed off by Nicola. She was, it was being sent in her name, and it was issued the next day, I think, on the 31st, which is in the papers.
So what you're saying is that the existing procedure was felt to be sufficient in relation to anything else that had come up as a result of the Me Too movement?
Yes, I do. And it hasn't, you know, here we are 3 years on, and the rule book, the the rules for disciplinary process are as they were back then.
So has it been looked at and thought of being revised at all, or are you still quite confident that it meets all the needs of anyone who might have a complaint?
It will be. I mean, we've gone through a constitutional review in the interim, and the disciplinary rules haven't changed, but that's not a fixed position. At any point we could look at the rules and think they need to be changed, sharpened up, whatever. So that's an option, and we now have a new National Secretary who's been in post for a couple of weeks, and they may take the view that the rules need to be updated. I mean, it's very much driven by the office bearers of the party, but at the end of the day it has to go to conference and has to be approved by delegates there.
So the procedure was drawn up by someone with a legal background. Did they have any HR background as well? Was it, when it was being drawn up, was there any HR input? Was there any input indeed from women who might, as it seems to have been with the Scottish Government one, with any women who might be in a situation where they might be liable to sexual harassment?
The rules in that form, I think, date back to 2004, I think. And my recollection is that there was a committee that was established to rewrite the party's constitution and rules. So there were many lawyers and many people adding, putting ideas into that process. So specifically HR, I couldn't say, but there would be lots of talent as part of that committee process of rewriting the party's constitution and rules. And to this day, they are, I would say, are fairly robust and stand the test of time. Okay,
and without going into too much to any detail about specific communications, were there any responses to the First Minister's email concerning this?
Yes, there were. And I think those are a matter of public record, I think, that we had complaints at that time about a parliamentarian and another individual.
And do you think that the action that was taken was satisfactory to those who had raised complaints or raised issues as a result of that email?
I would very much hope so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on now, please, to Murrell Fraser.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Mr. Murrell. Happy birthday. I guess. Thank you.
It's a good way to spend your birthday.
Yes, I'm sure you've been looking forward to it.
Can't wait for the cake later.
Thank you. I want to ask you about two specific items that you cover in your written evidence to the committee. And the first of that is in relation to the meetings that the First Minister held with Mr Salmon, which were on the 2nd of April, the 7th of June and the 14th of July 2018. And the meetings on the 2nd of April and the 14th of July were held in your home. Now, what was your understanding of the capacity in which the First Minister held those meetings with Mr Salmon?
Well, I wasn't at home, I wasn't aware of the capacity in which she was having the meetings.
So you weren't in the House at the time?
I wasn't at home at either meeting.
Right, okay, thank you.
And I think the third meeting took place at SNP conference on the eve of an SNP conference, and I suspect I was busy elsewhere. Okay. But I wasn't at home on the two occasions where the meeting took place.
Okay, because one of the things we're trying to understand is what was the nature of these meetings? We heard evidence last week from John Summers, who's the First Minister's Principal Private Secretary, that if these had been government meetings, they would have been in the ministerial diary and notes would have been kept, and that wasn't the case. So I think a reasonable assumption would be that these were meetings held in the First Minister's capacity as leader of the SNP. And if we read the First Minister's submission, she makes reference to the meeting, first of all, the meeting on the 2nd of April, how As party leader, she considered it important to find out whether Mr Salmon might be about to resign from the SNP. And then in relation to the meeting on the 14th of July, she says again she was anxious as party leader to understand whether his handling of this matter was likely to become public in the near future. So would it be reasonable to assume, therefore, that these were meetings held in her position as leader of the SNP?
Well, I think her position that she sets out is reasonable. I think the nature of the meeting, is really for her to say. But, it seems to make sense in what I've read of her submission that her impression of what the meeting was about, altered when the discussion happened. So, that seems a reasonable version of events that she sets out in her own written submission.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Because you say in your submission that you didn't discuss these meetings with Nicola, and yet you're the chief executive of the SNP. Surely if this was a SNP matter that was being discussed, would that not have been brought to your attention?
Well, Nicola meeting with Alec wasn't a big, it was not an uncommon event, shall we say. I mean, it wasn't anything unusual. It could have been about any matter as far as, I wasn't really aware that he was coming to the house on the first occasion. And it doesn't strike me as anything unusual. It was, they met, they spoke on the phone. I mean, it wasn't anything out of the ordinary.
So when were you first told about the nature of these meetings?
Well, at the time it became public knowledge. I mean, that's, that's the, whatever it is, the 25th of August or thereabouts, the following year.
So the leader of the SNP didn't at any point think to tell the chief executive of the SNP that there was a looming problem with the former leader of the SNP and the former First Minister of Scotland that might end up in the public domain.
But I think that the issue is that the issue that was raised with Nicola at the time was a Scottish Government matter. And, that's, Scottish Government business is not for me. I mean, it's, it's every single day Scottish Government business is not really to be on a daily basis. Nicola, it's a very confidential process. She's been a minister for a very long time, and we just don't talk about government business.
Yes, but you say it's government business, but I think one thing we are now clear about was that these meetings were not conducted on government business. They were not in the ministerial diary. There were no notes taken. In her own submission, Nicola Surgeon suggests that these were party matters that were being discussed. These were either government meetings or they were party meetings.
Well, I think, to be fair, what she sets out in the evidence is the case of prior to the meeting she thought it was about a party matter, and once Alec told her what the meeting was about, then it became something else.
Well, that might have been the case for the first meeting, but surely the subsequent meetings it would have been obvious what the matter being discussed was.
The Scottish Government matter.
Well, I think there's a degree of confusion here about whether these were government business meetings or whether these were party business meetings, and I don't think you're helping us to clear that up.
Well, but I mean, Nicola sets it out in her own written submission, and she will be in this chair very shortly, so you can ask her directly.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask you about something else? Because you make reference again in your, I think your second written submission to the text messages you sent on the 25th of January 2019. Now, this was the date of the first appearance of Mr Salmon in court in relation to the criminal charges against him. And the first text message said this: totally agree folk should be asking the police questions. Report now with Procurator Fiscal on charges, which leaves police twiddling their thumbs. So good time to be pressurising them. Would be good to know Met looking at events in London. And the second text message, which was shortly afterwards, said, TBH, to be honest, the more fronts he is having to firefight on, the better for all complainers, so CPS action would be a good thing. Can I start by asking you, what were the events in London that you were referring to?
I mean, I think, by that stage, there was, obviously charges had been, it's the day after the charge, Alec had been in court. So by that stage, there was awareness of concerns and complaints from different, parts of the SNP. So some were from Westminster, some, here in Scotland. So, there was some understanding of there being different judicial jurisdictions in play in terms of complaints or concerns being raised.
Right. So you were aware of pending complaints against Mr. Salmon from people in London?
Well, I think no matter who has raised concerns within the SNP, I don't have their permission to talk about their situation, but I think you can take from the text exchange that there was some awareness that CPS action was possible or pending.
Yeah. But these complaints clearly have not made it to a charges being laid, but you were aware there was something going on in the background, presumably.
Not specifics, but
there was chatter. Specific issues had been raised with you. A specific complaint had been made.
No, nothing specific. Just the fact that some matters were not for Police Scotland or for the Crown Office. Okay.
You use the term in your first text message that it would be a good time to be pressurising the police. You're the chief executive of Scotland's largest political party. It's not just Scotland's largest political party, it's the third largest political party in the United Kingdom in terms of the presence in the House of Commons. Is the party in government in Scotland, the First Minister of Scotland, the leader of your party, and indeed your spouse, and Police Scotland are ultimately answerable to the First Minister of Scotland. Can you see why that term causes concern?
I can see that the language that I used was open to misinterpretation. It wasn't about pressurising the police. It was about there was a great deal upset that day. The previous day, I'd been working for Alec for 30 years at that point, and I think we were all shocked by the scale of the charges that were being brought against him. And so there was a great deal of upset the previous day. I know myself, I didn't really sleep that night, came into the office, and everyone was, you can just imagine everyone was quite gutted. Reflecting on these messages now, they seem quite out of character. So to me, it suggests just how upset I was at the time. But it wasn't about how the messages were interpreted. It was, the context was that some people that had raised concerns had questions that, obviously my upset is nothing to comparison to theirs, but they were seeking answers to things that only the police or the Crown Office could answer. So it was really, a more appropriate text message back at that point would have been to say, they should seek answers from the police or whatever. But that wasn't the language I used, and that's why I've said that I regret using that, because it just doesn't, that's not the right word to use in that context.
Okay. Do you know if there was any action taken in response to that pressure that you're referring to?
There was no pressure. It was complainers seeking answers to questions that they had. That's the context of that morning.
You see, the reason I'm asking these questions is, and why this ties into the remit of the committee, is that we're looking at a complaints process set up by the Scottish Government, which failed. And it failed women who'd made complaints because they'd never had a resolution to this. And it failed and ended up costing the taxpayer over £1 million in legal costs because it was deemed to be illegal, and Mr. Salmon won his judicial review. And there are people close to Mr. Salmon, and you'll be aware of this, who believe there was a conspiracy against it. and they would point to these text messages and other evidence that's been presented as part of that. They would look at the fact, for example, this policy applying retrospectively to former ministers was adopted despite advice to the Scottish Government not to apply it. They would refer to the fact that the policy was signed off by the First Minister. They would refer to the fact that we now know the complainers were reluctant to go to the police initially, and it was Leslie Evans, the Permanent Secretary, who involved the police in the first instance. They refer to the text message from Leslie Evans at the point where Mr Salmon won his judicial review, saying that the battle was lost, but the war would be won. They would refer to the Scottish Government's lack of cooperation with this inquiry, and they would refer to the First Minister's lapses of memory about her first meeting in relation to Mr Salmon. And they would add into that your text message. I mean, can you understand why there are people who think this was all about trying to get Mr Salmon?
But the SNP's processes didn't, the procedure is exactly as it was and has been for 16 years. I mean, it's not, bar the SNP adding in an independent route for someone to raise a concern and take it to the National Secretary. Our processes haven't changed. I can only comment for the SNP. Our procedure is exactly as it was.
You said a moment ago you were very close to Mr Salmon. You worked in his constituency office previously. You've known him for 30 years. He was leader of the party when you were chief executive. How would you characterise your relationship with him now?
Well, I've had, I think I was trying to recall the last time we spoke probably was at some point during the 2017 election. I haven't spoken to him since.
Do you think he's been hard done by?
Well, I think that, complaints came forward and they had to be investigated and looked at by political parties, by the Scottish Government, by the police. I mean, those are proper processes to have happened with concerns that are brought forward to all of these institutions.
Okay. Final question, Convener. If Mr Salmon were to say tomorrow he wanted to rejoin the SNP, would you welcome him back?
That's an appropriate question, Mr Fraser. No, I don't think that's an appropriate question.
Okay.
I think we'll just end there and move on to Mr Cole-Hammond.
Thank you very much, Convener. Good morning, Mr Murrell. Thank you for coming today and happy birthday. Can I just ask, for the record, exactly how long you've known Alex Salmond?
Oh, good question. Since, I think, 1983 or 4, thereabouts.
And you've worked closely with him for that time. The First Minister characterises her relationship with Mr Salmond prior to their estrangement as being, quote, the most important outside of her family. How would you characterise your own relationship with Mr Salmond before the deterioration in your friendship?
Professional, I think, is the answer to that question. I've worked either directly for him and being employed by him or with him for most of those years. So, professional, I would say.
I should clarify, Convener, that I'm asking about the relationship here because I think it's apposite to understanding the First Minister's relationship as well. What would you say, Mr Murrell, was the catalyst behind the deterioration in your relationship with Mr Salmond?
In what time period are you?
Well, you've just said to Mr Fraser that you didn't speak.
I'd just clarify here that Mr Murrell's here in his professional position as Chief Executive of the SNP, so that should be borne in mind both
Yes.
in questioning and in answering.
Understood. Would you like to answer that question?
Sorry, I asked you which time period are you
Oh, I'm
referring
sorry.
to?
Okay, I'll be more specific, and this comes directly to your role as Chief Executive. Former advisor to Mr Salmond, Campbell Gunn, has stated in the national press that that Mr Salmond told Nicola Sturgeon, when she became First Minister, that he felt it was inappropriate for you to retain the position as Chief Executive of the SNP, that was too many conflicts of interest. Did you feel there was a campaign to see you gone from the side of Mr Salmond? Was that part of the deterioration in your relationship?
No, I mean, I've been through many election campaigns with Alec. We managed to get to a position where he became First Minister twice over. We're kind of, worked together a very long time, and, I think, if you're referring to a breakdown, I don't think there has been one. It's just there's been no contact, because I don't think that would be appropriate where you're seen to be, handling concerns being raised by individuals.
Thank you for that. In your answer to Margaret Mitchell, you were quite judicious with your choice of words around whether you were aware of complaints about Mr Salmond, and you answered in the negative that you were never aware of complaints within the SNP about Mr Salmond. But we've learned in this inquiry that complaints were very seldom formalised, and there were a number of concerns raised, certainly within the government, about Mr Salmond's behaviour, particularly in a sort of bullying context. Were you aware within the SNP of any concerns about Mr Salmond's conduct, either bullying or otherwise?
Well, he had very high expectations, and he could be difficult, and he could be unreasonable. But, I mean, there are individuals in life that are like that, and when you see that happening, you have to challenge it, and that's diffusing situations, smoothing things over is commonplace when you've got someone who is going at a very fast pace and expecting a lot of staff.
And did you ever, in your 20 years as Chief Executive, receive informal concerns raised directly with you by anyone in the SNP who chose not then to formalise it as an actual complaint against Mr Salmond, but might have had grounds to?
It would be the case that whether it's diffusing a situation at a meeting that perhaps, that someone was being challenged at a meeting, then that would certainly have, I can think of a couple of occasions when I did that. I can think of, maybe a couple of others that required some smoothing over the years, but, nothing of any sexual misconduct nature, nothing of anything of that order in all my years.
Thank you for that. Well, that brings me nicely on to my next question, which is about the revelation from Edinburgh Airport, the approach by Sky News for comment. And I think you told Margaret Mitchell that you were in a car on the way to an event with the First Minister when the call came through. Can I ask, who did that come from? I'm sorry?
I was at home. It wasn't a call, it was an email.
An email?
From one of the SNP parliamentary press offices.
Right. And so were you the person to break that news of that inquiry to the First Minister, or did she have some idea that, through her government sources, that similar inquiries were happening in the government?
I'm not sure if it was an email that came in. I'm not sure if I was the one that showed it to her. I can't recall, but it was simultaneous in terms of me telling her, seeing the email and showing her, because we were about to go out to an event.
Yeah. And so when that news came through, neither of you having had any prior concerns or understanding of issues around sexual misconduct by Alex Salmond, that must have been a bombshell moment. Did you discuss the implications for the SNP of what that story would mean if it materialised?
No. I think the first set out in Nicola's evidence of arrangement made to speak the next day with Alec. So that was the action that was taken that night. Was to it was 7:30 on a Saturday night. So likely the media were not, or the Sky News were not going to run a story that night. The inquiry had just landed without a time frame for response. So the view was taken that Nicola and Alec should speak the next morning, which is set out.
And did she intimate to you that, that there were discussions being had in the Scottish Government about the same inquiry? We know that Mr Salmond did approach civil servants.
I've heard other people give evidence to this committee about that, but I had no knowledge of that at the time.
Okay. I think I'm just trying to distill down. I mean, it's such an important revelation at the time, considering both of your relationships with Mr Salmond. And you're not very clear, Mr Murrell, as to whether you received this email and then broke the news to the First Minister, or if she already knew. And if she already knew, did she volunteer why she already knew?
No, she didn't know. I mean, that for us both, that was the moment.
Oh, that was so that was you breaking the news. No, that's very helpful.
I thought I was being clear. Okay,
thank you. Can I move on to the meetings of the meeting of particularly the 2nd of April? In her evidence, Nicola Sturgeon told the committee that the meetings of the 29th was the revelation moment of the government investigation for her, as she says, and then the meeting with Mr Salmond on the 2nd of April, that she went into that in the expectation or the belief that he might be about to resign from the party. I just want to press you further on Murdo Fraser's line of questioning, because it seems that wasn't a meeting about government business. There was a real threat to the SNP from what might be about to materialise. For all she knew, he was going to hand her a letter of resignation from the party. If she had an inkling that that was going to happen, would it not be right for her as leader of your party to involve you or the press team in an internal party's comms plan, an external party comms plan, warning lights going off the dashboard about this huge event that might be going to happen? Does that not strike you as odd that she didn't think to bring you into that confidence?
I don't think you pre-plan for a crisis. If you're, when you're dealing with kind of lives that we lead, where it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that you deal with something at the point. So, at the point at which something was happening, you would be told. So it's the same when it comes to, just take it out into the generality of it. We would only tell the party leader about the National Secretary taking action against a member, a prominent member, at the point at which the National Secretary would have decided to do that. So at the point at which someone would, we were going to suspend someone, potentially an administrative suspension, that's the point at which we would go to Nicola and make her aware of something. And it's the same the other way around. If that's the point at which I would be involved and we would just deal with something.
But that's quite different, isn't it, Mr Murrell? Because that's about protecting the leader, about plausible deniability. It's about only bringing it to their attention, because they're very busy people, First Ministers generally, and only bringing it to their attention when they have to know about it. Whereas actually your role exists to protect the SNP, to ensure that any kind of rifts that appear within it are healed as quickly as possible. Surely the fact that she knew 4 days before her meeting on the 2nd of April that Mr Salmond was going to come with some pretty strong information that would cause damage to the SNP. I'm sorry, I just find it incredible that you didn't have a discussion prior to either of those meetings so that you could at least lay the groundwork for an SNP response to that.
There's no groundwork that you could have laid for that event, and she did. She set it out in her own evidence, and that's just the truth of it. I mean, it wasn't something that we discussed prior to it. I really wasn't aware that he was coming to the house. I mean,
I'm sorry, Mr Murrell, I find it hard to believe you. I'm not saying, but it just really jars with me. And the reason is, I mean, take my party. We're the smallest party in Scotland, but we have mechanisms for dealing with bad news. I mean, we had our fair share of bad news, but we always prepare an internal common strategy, an external common strategy, the risk follow-up, lots of different things. I just find it difficult that you are one half of Scotland's most powerful couple, and this is not a conversation that passed over the breakfast table in those 4 days prior to the 2nd of April.
I think you misunderstand the life of a First Minister, that, up early in the morning, back late at night, lots happening in between, very limited time at home, very limited personal time. I mean, it's, the way that you're characterising it there is that we had 4 days at home. That just doesn't happen. It just doesn't. I mean, the First Minister is constantly on the phone, constantly at meetings, constantly reading papers, constantly dealing with government business. It's just not, I think if you're, back before we started, to win elections, we used to pre-plan things as well and have lots of strategies for things. But in the end, you ended up ripping them all up because that's not what happened. And, when you're in a fast-moving political situation, you deal with things at the point they happen. You can't just, pre-plan things in that nature. It just isn't how it happens.
The SNP is the most well-staffed party in the whole of Scotland. You are legendary for your comms prowess. And yet you mean to tell me that a variation in the land and building transaction debate tax set of papers took precedence over discussions of this nature to prepare your party for the biggest bombshell in its history? Okay. Final question from me, Convener. I apologise for taking so much time. We learned from the Scottish Government last week that when those revelations broke, when the investigation concluded, the Daily Record ran its piece, and the investigations were passed on to the police, that the Scottish Government then had a small flurry of other complaints come forward from within its ranks. Did that precipitate a similar flurry of complaints within the SNP or concerns being raised?
I think that's the point at which the party did receive, in the period after that, after it became public, is the point at which the party received reports of concerns being raised by individuals, a small number of them.
And how many of them, and what did you do?
Well, it's a small number, and I think there's various emails which were issued at that time, but so I think it was the 25th of August that the story broke in the Daily Record. Alex resigned, I think, on the 28th of August. The complaints didn't arrive, or the summary reports coming from the independent process. So there's no, of the two processes for reporting concerns, none came through the internal route, and a small number came through the independent external route. But that was into September before they arrived. By that stage, Alec had left the party, and the police were involved. So there's an active police investigation by the point at which the National Secretary received a small number.
Did the party then refer that small number of complaints or concerns to the police?
Can I stop you there? I'm getting a wee bit concerned that we could be getting into the realms of jigsaw identification. Yeah.
Fair enough. I apologise. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cole-Hamilton. Jackie Bailey, and then finally Andy.
Thank you very much, Convener. Can I also wish Mr Murrell a happy birthday as well, and I hope the First Minister finds time in her busy schedule to take you out this evening. You've spoke a lot about... Sorry?
I'm in level 4.
So you are? You could maybe get a takeaway then. You spent a lot of time...
If I'm a lucky boy.
You spent a lot of time talking about the First Minister's statement and having read it. Can I ask you, did you discuss your evidence that you're giving today with the First Minister prior to coming here? No, you didn't?
No.
Not at all?
No.
Oh, okay. That's quite extraordinary. You've said to others that you worked with Alex Salmond for, I think I counted, about 37 years in different guises. Yeah?
Steady on. Slightly less than that.
No, 1983?
So let's say 4 decades. Let's compromise.
Okay, 4 decades is even longer than 37 years, but there you go. So you would know him quite well, and I think you said to others that there were, aside from 1 or 2 incidents, there were few concerns about his behaviour. Would that be accurate?
Over all that time, very few.
Okay, that's helpful to know. One of my colleagues raised the incident at Edinburgh Airport and obviously the contact from the press, which occurred in 2017. But when was the Edinburgh Airport incident? Was it not much earlier than that?
The Sky News inquiry said it was in 2009.
All right, 2009. Okay. And that was reported at the time to Angus Robertson, who was the Westminster leader of the SNP. Is that correct?
That's what the email from Sky News said.
Okay. Well, you will have discussed it with Angus Robertson, I'm assuming, because he still remains a party colleague. Did he suggest that that was correct?
Well, I think the committee's written to Angus and given him a deadline to respond.
You.
Well, I think it's only fair that you give Angus the chance to give his own evidence.
I was asking you because I would have assumed that something, again, of that nature would have been reported to you as Chief Executive of the SNP. Was it ever reported to you in 2009 or thereafter, before Sky News got in touch?
It was reported to me on the 4th of November 2017 at 7:27 in the evening. It kind of sticks in my mind for some reason.
Okay, would it not be strange as Chief Executive of the SNP if something hadn't been reported to you of that nature? Or does this go on often and people don't tell you things that are going on in the party?
I think that, as we were trying to, when we were liaising with clerks about this, political parties are strange beasts. They're unincorporated associations. So, we're all just individuals. So if someone reports something to one member of the party and they don't share that information, it's not something that the SNP can be aware of. It's just...
I am a member of a political party too. I tend to know how they operate and have been around probably as long as you. And people are told things that go on, particularly of that nature, and they're told quite quickly. So I am genuinely surprised that you didn't know at all, because we would have known. And there's not that much difference in terms internally of how political parties operate.
But all I can tell you is that that's the first time in all my years working for ALEC, across 30 years, the first time I saw anything of that nature being suggested was on the 4th of November 2017.
Okay.
That is the truth.
Okay. You described the meeting of the 2nd of April, I think, to us in evidence as something you wouldn't be aware of because it was conducted by Nicola Sturgeon in her role as First Minister. You've read Nicola Sturgeon's statement. In it, she says quite clearly she wasn't having the meeting as First Minister, it was as SNP leader. On that basis, would you expect to know, as the most senior ranking official within the SNP, what the content of that discussion was?
Well, I mean, she sets it out in her own evidence. You can ask her when she comes here. I mean, it's, I can only look at what she has written in evidence and say that sounds, that is a reasonable interpretation of events. Okay,
but your evidence conflicted with hers. You said that she had that meeting as the First Minister, and therefore you wouldn't know because it wasn't proper for you to know government business. I entirely accept that statement. The difficulty you have is Nicola Sturgeon has said, no, she wasn't the SNP leader. She said she was not the First Minister having that meeting, she was the SNP leader having that meeting. As the highest ranking official within the SNP, would you have expected to be told about it?
Well, I think, again, it's set out there for you. I mean,
it's set out in conflict.
If it was a matter that was, coming to the party as something that was about to happen, then yes, I would expect to be told. And that's what happens. I get told things when they're about to come my way. And that happens all the time. Similarly, when the news was breaking, it came to me very late. And that's just what happens. You get, it's on a need-to-know basis.
Okay. The reason I'm exploring this is because there is a conflict, a direct conflict, in your statement compared to Nicola Sturgeon's. Okay? There's no dubiety about that. You have both written different things. Well, it's in black and white. But anyway, I just don't accept that. I'll not pursue the point further. It is in black and white, and the record will show that. Can I turn to these infamous text messages? Who are the text messages with? I just don't think it's fair that
I'm
Okay.
asked to identify someone that has privacy rights and.
Okay, I think the person was identified in the press already and has been identified as your chief operating officer.
But I think that
Okay, if you don't want to do that,
I don't think this really is a.
Can I ask if there were further messages from you to this party official or indeed any other party official in the same vein associated with this topic?
What do you mean? Sorry.
Oh, in relation to the allegations about the former First Minister Alex Salmond.
And what? Sorry.
So, okay, let me go back. The text messages you sent that we've seen were to your chief operating officer. I'm asking if there were other text messages to any other party official on the same subject.
No.
No.
Not that I'm aware of. No. Not that I can
Okay. Okay. You say in your evidence to the committee, you're coming here before the committee, that you conferred with Ian McCann, who's the compliance officer, and Sue Ruddock, the chief operating officer, that no other relevant information was found. Can you repeat that under oath?
Well, it's in my evidence, so.
Sure. I'm just asking you to confirm that under oath, that there's nothing else there.
There's nothing else, no.
Okay. In the criminal trial, one of the witnesses was reported to have said that the situation with the former First Minister was indeed reported to Ian McCann and recorded in his file. Is that true?
Whose file?
Alex Salmond's file.
I don't think. There isn't an Alex Salmond file.
So there's no such files exist. So I'm just simply going on the basis of the testimony at the criminal trial that somebody said they reported it to Ian McCann. There's no files.
No. I'm aware that there was reports of such text messages in the press. I wasn't in court. I don't know about these text messages.
I'm basing this on what I read in the newspapers.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you aware of any contact between Ms Ruddock and special advisers or ministers about the judicial review? No. So you're not aware of it. Were you aware that a WhatsApp group was formed on the day that the judicial review was lost? It was a group convened, I understand, by the Chief Operating Officer. Were you aware of that WhatsApp group?
I'm not, no.
Okay. Did you see any of the messages in that group?
I'm not aware of any WhatsApp group.
Okay. So you're not aware of the WhatsApp group. Again, gleaned from the press, at the preliminary hearing, I understand that one of the messages talked about government special advisers were convening a council of war. Do you understand what that means?
Well, I've already explained that I don't know anything about a WhatsApp group, so.
No, I'm just asking about if you understand what the messages might mean. Did you ever hear talk of government special advisers?
Sorry. Are these WhatsApp messages or are they text messages?
These were WhatsApp messages, and I'm asking you, did you ever know about government special advisers convening a council of war?
I can only tell you I know nothing about a WhatsApp group.
Okay.
I'm not on WhatsApp, so it's not a social media platform I use.
Can I say that's a very sensible thing to do? But that's for another day. Did Ms Ruddock, at your behest, encourage people to make police complaints from autumn 2018 onwards?
I don't think we would. That's not something that staff would do. We wouldn't. That's not something that would be appropriate, I don't think. So, no, that's...
Okay.
But, I'm not aware of any of what you're, describing to me.
Okay.
And it doesn't fit with... It fits neither with... It doesn't fit with the compliance side of things, it doesn't fit with the duty of care, and it doesn't fit with the independent process either. That's not what we would do.
Okay.
We would not say to people, go to the police. It's not something, unless it was something that was, clearly, and obviously a matter for the police to look at.
Okay, I understand that. Can I then turn to your actual messages that were shared with the committee and ask you again, what did you mean by the police will be twiddling their thumbs and so it's a good time to pressurise them?
I've set that out already. It's not, the language I used wasn't, and, I don't think was appropriate. It was pretty out of character, I would say, for myself, but I can only just explain that as being how upset I was that morning. But the reality and the context was that we were approached by people that morning who sought answers to questions that could only be answered by the police, whether that's the police that had been, allocated to take their statement or whatever. They should go back to the same police officers and ask questions to seek the clarity that they were looking for.
But you are a man who has been in politics, by your own words, for 4 decades now. You are a man who is very careful with his language. Text messages invite you to be brief and invite you to be very clear about what you're saying. Are you saying that for 1 day in 40 years you got it wrong?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Because of what we were dealing with that morning. And the previous day. It was, we were all gutted by what we had seen roll out over the previous 24 hours.
Okay.
It was very flat, very emotional time for everybody in headquarters. It was very upsetting. But,
sure.
So yes, I would, hands up, I would say the language is not appropriate, and, I do very much regret those words, and, I just put it down to the hurt and the,
So can I ask then, when you said the more fronts he is having to firefight on, the better for all complainers, what was that about?
That's a, I think I've worried, I've worried, I worry all the time about this still, but I do worry about the women, so that's what that's about.
Good, and I'm glad to hear that you do so. If my memory is right, by this stage I think Alex Hammond had resigned from the SNP. So I'm trying to understand what the party interest would be if you were making him fight on 2 fronts. Did you encourage anybody to make a complaint to the Crown Prosecution Service that was a party member or a non-party member?
No.
No, you didn't. Okay. I'm sure you would recognise, I hope you recognise, how dangerous it is for a senior official, the most senior official of a political party, with such a close personal relationship with a head of government, to interfere in a police investigation. You wouldn't do something like that, would you?
I wouldn't. No.
Okay. Okay. Can I turn to the question of the letter? And I'm coming to a conclusion, convener. You provided us with the letter of the 31st of October from the First Minister. Was this the only letter that was issued on harassment or the SNP disciplinary process?
Well, that was issued in 2017. Further, at the time at which Alec, the news broke about the allegations in the Daily Record, I think there was a repeat of something similar at that point of providing people with the 2 processes for reporting complaints.
Okay. Can I ask...
Which is just of
Sure.
what was in that original email a year earlier.
Would it be possible for the committee to see this, because we haven't been provided with that letter?
Right. Well, I can take a look at that, yeah.
That would be very helpful, thank you. Can I ask, was that letter sent to party members? Was it sent to staff? Who was it sent to?
I think it was sent to all members of the party. Because one of the, obviously through the Me Too, through 2017 and 2018, we had dealt with a number of different complaints. And I think one of the things that we had learned over that period was that even if something was in the media, it would spark a reaction with other people. So we were aware that you could cause a lot of hurt from people historically by just through the simple fact of something being in the news. So, we wanted to make sure that whether it was on duty of care or on the methods for reporting, that people had that as an option. So they had the prospect of reaching out and getting assistance if they had any historic issues. But wasn't, it just wasn't it wasn't simply about, offering up ways to complain. I mean, it just wasn't.
Sure. No, and I appreciate that. So was this sent to past members of staff as well, based on what you just said?
Sent to all members.
Okay, all members, but could there have been past members of staff who are no longer members of the SNP?
That's potential, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
Was it sent to them?
Well, it's sent to all members. So.
Okay. Well, what I'm trying to establish is if there were staff members who are no longer members of the SNP, would it have been sent separately to them? Because they wouldn't have been captured in the all members mailing.
We tried. I think what we also tried to do was to capture, through the knowledge of the existing staff teams, if there was anyone that might have worked in a previous period, so that the information was shared across everyone. So potentially, yes.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Were any of the returns that you would have received, people contacting you, was that shared with Scottish Government special advisors or indeed Scottish Government civil servants?
No.
No. Okay. Finally, can I put it to you, there has been a suggestion that your text messages were evidence of a plot to ensure the downfall of Alex Salmond, and that you had a key role in that. Is that true?
Well, the timeline would say no, because he had been charged by the time I sent those text messages. So all complainers had come forward by that point, and the police had charged him and he had appeared in court. So it's not true, no.
Okay.
Of course it's not true.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a short supplementary on this from Alex Cole-Hamilton, and then we'll move to Andy Whiteman for the last of the questioning.
Thank you, Convener. I'm quite happy to come in after Andy. It's not directly related to Jackie Bailey. It's from
All
my
right
earlier
then,
line of
well, I'll
questioning.
keep you till the end then, please. Andy Whiteman.
Thanks, Convener. Happy birthday seems to be the protocol. First of all, can I just clarify, following Murdo Fraser and Jackie Bailey's questions, that the 31st of October email was sent, I think you initially said it was sent to MPs, MSPs and SNP staff, but can you confirm that it was also sent to SNP members?
I don't, that 31st of
Yes.
October one, no, it wasn't. It was just sent, it was, the language of it, which is in your papers,
Yep.
it was aimed at parliamentarians, whether at, well, indeed, at the time, the European Parliament, Westminster and Holyrood, and sought to ask parliamentarians to reflect on past behaviours and also try to reach out to staff members on, the methods by which you could report any concerns that they had at the time.
Okay, so MPs, MSPs,
MEPs,
MEPs,
councillor,
SNP staff,
and staff.
councillors.
Yeah.
Okay, but not SNP members, the 31st of October one, and not office holders in the SNP, then?
It would have gone to, it would have gone to the National Executive Committee and so on.
Okay. Right.
But that's a very small number of
Sure.
people.
So you said earlier that the SNP has procedures, and you've helpfully provided them to the committee, and that the changes that were the only change that was made in October 2017 was that you provided an independent route via an external party. The only change, yeah. Can I ask you if a person raised a complaint about, let's say, for example, a member of staff in headquarters, and it related to sexual harassment, what article of the Code of Conduct would they raise it under?
So also in your bundle of papers is, so there's a staff handbook as well. So the grievance procedure for SNP headquarters staff is within your bundle as well. So that would be the method by which someone would complain about another member of staff.
Staff, so that would be done in the staff procedure. Yes. What about an allegation or a complaint of sexual harassment against an SNP office holder? For example, I don't know, the Treasurer, the National Secretary, or whoever. What I'm trying to get at is, I'm just trying to work out, when you talk about...
No, it's fine. That would be a member conduct complaint.
So that they could have conducted for members. Yes. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yes.
Sorry. What of the 15 conduct standards would a complaint of sexual harassment be raised under?
Well, that's where you would get the National Secretary to make that decision. But
no, the reason
there are a number of different codes that, standards that could be breached by that conduct. So,
I don't see many.
well, I think there's certainly 2 anyway. But
there's number 8, which says that no member shall abuse, harass, or bully, or maliciously defame any other member, whether via the media or otherwise. It's just
that would be one. Yeah,
that'd be one. It's just in the complaints under the disciplinary rules, under item 3, complaints to the disciplinary committee. The disciplinary committee shall consider complaints presented to it by the National Secretary. It goes on to say 3.2, a complaint presented by the National Secretary is a proposal by him/her that the disciplinary committee should take disciplinary measures against a member of the party on one of the following grounds: A, that the member has contravened the constitutional rules, so presumably a sexual harassment case wouldn't be under that, or B, that the member has breached one of the numbered standards in the party's code of conduct. The reason I'm asking is it doesn't appear to me that the SNP has a policy on sexual harassment explicitly, and I'm just a bit surprised at that, in the sense that the only reference to the word harass appears in Conduct Standard 8.
Well, it would fit. There are different processes and procedures throughout all the different aspects of, so whether that's Parliament or the party itself. But that would be a valid route for someone to pursue they're specific for employees, there are specific routes for them to take. If it's a member conduct, then that would be the appropriate way to do that, because you're not dealing with an employee. But specific policies for employees are in place. So someone who works for an MSP has a specific process and procedure for investigating sexual misconduct allegations. Similarly across the other parliaments and within councils. But where that's not the case and you're dealing with volunteers of members of political parties, then the standard there would be as close as you would get to that procedure.
Okay, now I understand that parliamentarians and councillors all have different routes, but I'm just wondering, for example, at a party conference where somebody alleges that they were sexually harassed by another person, could indeed be an elected official, but they'd be there in their capacity as a party member because they're attending the party's national conference. You would rely on the code of conduct for members for that. Okay. Yes, I'm just expressing a little bit.
Well, I wouldn't. The National Secretary would.
No, indeed. I'm just expressing a little bit of surprise that following the Me Too movement and everything that's happened, that there's no more explicit reference to sexual harassment. But I'll leave it. I'll leave that there. Can I move on to the 2nd of April meeting that's already been discussed? Because I just want to clarify a few things. You said you weren't at home, you were elsewhere.
At work.
You were at work. Good. You say in your 4th of August evidence, you say requests of me in a personal capacity. That's requests from the committee. A, I became aware that complaints had been made under the Scottish Government procedure when the matter became public in August 2018. So that's the first time you were aware. You then say, I knew about the meetings between Nicola and Alex Salmond at her home on 2nd April and 14th July. So when you say I knew about them, when did you first know about the 2nd of April meeting?
I think at some point on the previous day I was aware that Alec was coming to the house.
Okay, that's what that means.
And on the second meeting,
I'm not so concerned about the second one.
Well, okay, but I mean, I can't actually remember the second.
No, okay.
But as I say, it wasn't an unusual occurrence, so it wasn't, it wasn't something that would have.
Right. So you knew in advance that that meeting was going to happen.
Yes.
A day before, so yeah.
I think so, anyway.
Yep. And then you go on to say, and I had the sense that something serious was being discussed. How did you obtain that sense?
Well, I came home from work, and there were people still in the house at that point.
So sorry. You said you weren't at your home on the 2nd of April.
That's correct. But
you're saying you did actually come home.
I arrived home not long before the meeting ended.
Okay, right.
But
okay, that's fine. And so you were aware that those people were going to be there. Well, they may have left, but you were aware that a meeting had been arranged.
Yes.
Yeah. And you say you had the sense that something serious had been discussed. So that sense was picked up by your arrival home and just the atmosphere, was it?
Well, so to give you the situation, I arrived home and popped my head into our living room, and there were 3 individuals in the living room. Alec and Nicola were in another room, which I couldn't see them. So the fact that there were other people there was what gave me that sense.
Okay, and then you said Nicola told me she couldn't discuss the details, so that was after.
That was after. So I went upstairs, I got changed, I had a shower, I got changed, and by the time I'd done that, the meeting had ended, they'd left.
Okay, and then you're going to say...
So there's no interaction, really, apart from saying hello to people when I arrived and going upstairs.
Okay, thanks. And then you go on to say the nature of Nicola's job means that when she tells me she can't discuss something, I don't press it. The reference to Nicola's job presumably means that her job as First Minister.
Yes.
Okay. So that was just a general... you didn't expect to have... You didn't anticipate being told chapter and verse or indeed any detail, because that wasn't an unusual thing for you to be denied knowledge of things that were happening. But what was unusual was the apparent serious nature of the meeting, though. You say you sensed that something serious was being discussed.
Well, that's because of the fact there were other people there than just what I was expecting, which was that Alec and Nicola would be having a meeting.
Okay, thanks. Can I turn finally, this is my final query. So this is to your written evidence of 2nd October 2020. So towards the end of your evidence, you talk about these text messages, which for the record I have not seen. I've just been present in this committee for the last week. You say that the messages were sent the day after Mr. Salmond had been charged with a number of serious offences. And you're going to say, in the aftermath of this, the SNP was contacted by individuals who had specific personal questions in relation to that criminal case. Can you say anything more? I don't want you to identify any individuals, but can you say anything more about the nature of these personal questions and why they related to the criminal case?
Well, I think I set that out, that individuals who had previously spoken to the police were asking, had questions which they wished answers to that could only be answered by the police or by the Crown Office, and that's the context of those text messages, of the approaches by these individuals. And what the specific questions were, I don't know, but the SNP couldn't answer the questions. They could only be answered by the prosecution or by by the police or by the Crown Office, I think.
So just to be clear, when you say in the aftermath of this, you're talking about the aftermath of the charging with serious offences? Yeah. So, excuse me, these individuals who had specific personal questions, these were people who had spoken to the police, yes, either as witnesses or complainers, or did you not know?
I think we've gone far enough in this questioning in terms of jigsaw identification.
Okay, thanks very much, Convener. That's everything.
Alec, have you got a supplement? Alec Cole-Hamilton has a short supplementary. Jackie Bailey, short supplementary. We've been a long time in this session. Alec Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much for bringing me back in, Convener. Just two very, very quick follow-ups. Firstly, on the evening that you and the First Minister learned of the Edinburgh Airport concerns from Sky News, did the First Minister attempt to contact Alex Salmond in any way that evening or in subsequent days?
Is that not part of the evidence she's submitted?
Just if you can refresh our memory.
Sorry?
If you can just refresh our memory.
And your question is, sorry?
Whether she contacted Alex Salmond following that Sky News inquiry.
I think they arranged to speak next morning on the phone. That's the arrangement that was made.
That's fine. The final supplemental I have is on the meeting of the 2nd of April and your exchange with Andy Whiteman there. Mr Murrell, couples share things. It's why spousal privilege exists in many countries to this day, that, not in Scotland, but in other parts of the UK and other parts of the world, spouses will not be required to testify against each other because it's understood that marital home is sacrosanct. People share stuff, they vent the rest of it. So, again, you've been very judicious with your phrasing in your written evidence, and you said that after the conclusion of that meeting on the 2nd of April, that Nicola Sturgeon couldn't discuss the details with you, and you knew, given the nature of her job, not to press it. But that suggests that she might have given you an idea of what had been said at that meeting. Is that correct?
No, it's not.
So she gave you, I mean, how
well,
was her...
I think,
yeah.
I try and set it out, but I think, given that other individuals were there, what had triggered in my head was the Sky News inquiry coming back, to which she said it wasn't, and she couldn't discuss what it was about, and that's the point at which, I wasn't going to probe any further. Once when you're married to the First Minister, who is privy to lots of information, when she says she can't talk about something, you don't continue to say, but what about? It just doesn't happen. And she's been a minister for a long time, and works very hard every day, every weekend. And when we get precious time together, the last thing we want to be doing is rerunning days with each other or whatever. So when she says that she can't talk about something, then that's the end of it, and we move on to something else, like what book she's reading, or what I'm going to make her for a tea, or whether she needs me to wash something, or whatever. It's kind of...
I think we all know what book she reads from Twitter. But, well, thank you, Mr Murrell. I think that's probably it for me then, Convener.
Jackie Bailey.
I just say what an understanding husband you are, Mr Murrell. I am very impressed. A couple of very quick things. Am I correct in saying you said to me there were no records on MSPs or MPs on file about complaints?
On record?
So, yeah, no records on MSPs or MPs' files about complaints.
That's not an appropriate way to file things in that way. I mean, it's... So if someone comes to you with, if someone's reporting concerns or complaints, then they need to be investigated and dealt with, so that you don't...
Do you not keep a record, if there's a complaint made against an MSP, for example, do you keep a record on their file?
I think it would be fairer to say that you could compile a record. These days you can conduct searches and you can compile, what information you need from different sources. There is not, crikey, I would. I think that
I would want to be sure you were tracking things.
We do not keep files on.
Okay.
Parliamentarians or anyone else.
Okay, can I ask you,
something that's appropriate?
In your tracking system, are there any outstanding investigations into Alex Salmond?
I mean, the process is one where, the National Secretary had received some reports in September of 2018, by which time he'd left. So in terms of, what action the party could take, there is none, because the ultimate sanction is expulsion, and he had left. So there's no action the party could take with those complaints.
And one final bit of detail, I wonder if you could clear up for me, because I might have got this wrong. You said to us, I think, that you knew nothing until it came out officially. So can I ask you, how did you know about the London allegations, given that we've only just discovered them a couple of months ago?
Sorry, in terms of...
So you said to the committee before that you knew nothing about the allegations against Alex Salmond until they came out officially. And, that was obviously a great shock to you. So I'm trying to square the timeline about how did you then tweet about the London... send a text message about the London allegations, because we've only just discovered them a couple of months ago.
They were 4 months apart, so, I discovered on the 25th of August 2018, and my text message was the 26th of January 2019. There's 4 months between.
But what I'm suggesting is we didn't really find out about the London allegations till much more recently than that. I'll go back and check my timeline.
Yeah.
So, sorry, when was the text message? In January?
I don't have.
So you just said it.
Others of you may have those text messages, but
26, sorry, thank you. It's just you just said it, so, but I didn't write it down fast enough. Okay, I'll go away and check my timeline. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Everyone, thank you very much, Mr Murrell, for coming, which I now know was your birthday, to give your evidence today. Much appreciated. And the committee will now move into private session.